Welcome to Healing Childhood Trauma, the podcast for millennial women who are ready to heal from the past. Here, we have the deeper discussions on emotional well-being and practical tips that will empower you to transform your relationships and underlying anxiety from insecure to secure attachment. I'm Lizandra, your host and psychotherapist. I'm a little bit obsessed with human development, deep conversations, and finding the lesson even in the most challenging of circumstances. I'm very happy to have you with me on this journey of self-discovery where we unpack the past and heal in the present. I hope you don't mind a bit of a ranty episode, but with recent events, I had to talk about this, and it is about the viral article that is on the tip of so many people's tongues at the moment, which is, I'm going to link it also in the show notes. So if you want to go and read that for reference, please do. But it's called Is Having a Boyfriend Embarrassing Now? And I'm going to talk about it from my perspective. As a therapist, I no longer work with couples. And it's because of what I've seen in the relationship space and what I have seen, namely from men, not just men, but 95% of the time, I've seen this happening with men repeatedly. So I thought now is the time to talk about it. I kind of have to just speak on what my experiences are, and if it ruffles the feathers of some or many, I think that's just a risk I'm going to have to take because it's the truth and it's what I've seen. And I think many other therapists will probably attest to this too if they are also working in the couples therapist space. If you've been listening to this podcast, you might have heard me hint before that I'm not working with couples anymore, or I'm not working with couples at the moment. And now I'm going to get into exactly why that is. In the article, it was just talking about the perspective of being single and how the perception of women now being single has a very much different feel to it than what it used to. It used to almost be used as a threat that, oh, if you don't find a partner or you don't find a husband, you're going to end up alone with your cats. And whereas before that seemed like a horrible thing, now the women are saying, don't threaten me with a good time. And I love that for us, because even though I work a lot with relationships and attachment, I don't really like coming at it through the focus of working through your attachment issues in order to find the one, as in romantic relationships are the only way that you can heal from your attachment issues, as though that's the only way that you're going to have self-worth, and that's the only way that you can prove that you're good enough is to be chosen. Because I think attachment and healing and relationships are about more than just romantic relationships. I am absolutely not against romantic relationships or marriage, but what I am against is being defined by it, or people using it as a weapon. That if you don't find it or you don't have it, there's something wrong with you or you're not good enough. When actually sometimes many people with secure attachment are so secure in themselves and are so sure about what they do want and what they don't want from relationships, they are willing to sacrifice being in a relationship for their peace. And that's probably one of the most secure things that you can do if you are very intentional about what it takes to be in a relationship and what you want from a relationship, and you don't find that in someone. Choosing to not have a relationship just for the sake of it, to me, that's the most secure thing that you could ever do. Forgive me, because there is no usual plan. Usually I have like some bullet points or some notes about what I'm going to talk about. But today I'm just freestyling, so it's going to jump about a little bit because that's kind of how my brain works. So hopefully you can follow along with me and I'm not jumping around too much, but it's all based on the same thing. I'm not going to jump around and talk about lawnmowers, for example, even though I've just jumped into talking about lawnmowers. Anyway, this is why I stopped working with couples. Now, when I first started working with couples, I really, really enjoyed it. And I really saw the benefit of being able to kind of expand my practice because I was working a lot with individuals. And when we would do our individual work on like trauma and relationship patterns, often the other person or the person they were in a relationship with or trying to be in a relationship with, they would often come into the therapy room, and it was almost like we were working with them in the room without them being in the room. So I thought, okay, so in order for me to be able to understand more about these patterns and how it's playing out, Firstly, I need to have them more than just the idea of them in the room and the person's perception of them in the room. I need to actually have that person in the room. So that was one of the reasons why I trained as a couples therapist, and I really thought it would be like super interesting and a different shift and a different dynamic, which it most definitely is and was. To begin with, I saw everyday couples going through everyday couple relationship shit that we do, right? Couples who were having issues around communication, not having their needs met, their childhood patterns resurfacing in their current relationship, issues around household chores, finances. Those were like the top issues that people were coming to couples therapy for. And I helped so many couples go from being disconnected and not understanding each other to having better communication and also having a better relationship. And we could do that in a very short space of time. We didn't actually need to have years of therapy. And I quite liked the difference of that, because I work most of the time very long term with people. I quite liked having the difference of being able to work with people short term and to see such drastic changes in their relationships, because it really did change how they would relate to each other, and then how they would then feel about each other, and also how they would feel about themselves. So initially I found it really, really rewarding, even though it was very draining. It was always a very draining experience, and just generally being a therapist is quite a draining thing to do, because you are putting so much of your energy and so much of yourself into the work. It does actually take a lot out of you. So although I did find it draining, I also found it really, really rewarding at the same time. And it was also exciting, it was dynamic, and it was a pleasure really to work with many of the couples that I worked with. I really did enjoy the work. Something shifted in the last few years, and I feel like it was something around talking more about narcissism, narcissistic personalities and narcissistic traits. And it felt like that was all that was coming through the door. It was partners who were very narcissistic, who lacked empathy, who were more interested in their own ego as opposed to connecting with their partners. And it wasn't just about communication patterns anymore, or trying to understand childhood patterns and how that might be showing up in an adult relationship. I started to see a pattern of very problematic and abusive behaviours. And mostly this would be from men. Now, that's not to say that I didn't also see women with a lot of toxic patterns and narcissistic traits in couples therapy as well. But it was predominantly men who were really, really problematic. And it might be with the rise of different personalities coming out, like Andrew Tate, and people who just have very disgusting views about life and humans, and just have very poor morality and no sense of integrity, devalue women. And it moved from having everyday conflict to things starting to become emotionally manipulative. And even when there wasn't any physical abuse happening, there was a lot of very insidious emotional abuse happening. Manipulative tactics, gaslighting, name calling. And I don't just mean like name calling as in you're messy or I can't stand when you do that, but really saying really deep cutting things, just disgusting things that you would never say to another human being. People who have more narcissistic patterns and tendencies are very good at turning on the charm. They are very good at playing the nice guy. They are very good at being charismatic, making jokes, being witty, being funny, being personable. While the person who is on the other end of that, who might not be as charismatic because their personality has been chipped away at through gaslighting and manipulation and put downs, obviously they're not going to be showing up as their best selves. Their nervous systems are very dysregulated. They already don't feel great about themselves. They're already feeling very insecure. They're feeling as though they're losing their minds. So they're not necessarily coming into therapy as the best versions of themselves, because they've already been chipped away at. And all of this charisma that someone with more of a narcissistic personality has, they tend to show that to the therapist. And it's basically sucking up. It's to get the therapist on side. And you have to be very skilled at being able to pick up those kind of behaviors, and you have to understand what narcissistic overt and covert personality presentations look like, because it's not always obvious. And it's very easy for any therapist to get blindsided by, I don't see what the problem is. Let's just work on communication. Let's just forget about what's happening right now, or let's forget about the past. How do we move forward? And it's the worst possible thing that a person who is going through narcissistic abuse can hear. And it's why I don't think couples therapy actually works when there is narcissistic abuse involved. It's not helpful. In fact, it just reinforces those patterns of gaslighting. It sometimes ends up that the person who is essentially the victim feels persecuted, feels ganged up on. So instead of it only being the partner telling them that they're always wrong, or it's their fault, they're the reason why there's all these issues in the relationship, you've also got the therapist who is almost sometimes unconsciously biased and also siding with them and reinforcing that feeling of shame, reinforcing the manipulation, reinforcing everything that the narcissist says behind closed doors. And only some of the things they'll say in the presence of the therapist. Other things they're saying backhandedly, or they're saying outside of therapy, because they can't actually be very honest. They can't be too honest. They can't really show their true selves. They'll have to show the polished version of themselves, the acceptable version of themselves. And they're very good at doing that because they've been doing it probably their entire adult lives. And having your everyday relationship struggles around communication and having conflict, because conflict is very normal and very healthy in relationships. It just depends on the type of conflict and how that conflict gets played out. But conflict is very different to manipulation and to abuse and to toxic relationships. And where I felt very uncomfortable and where I drew the line was when I had to start explaining why it was not okay to grab your partner and shove them against the wall. That's when I was like, yeah, I don't think this is for me, because if I have to explain that to someone, to a grown adult, why it's not okay to treat their partner that way, it just became really, really draining and really heavy. And I started to dread working with couples. If someone got in touch and it was a couples inquiry, I inwardly groaned. And so I kept putting my prices up, and I didn't realise why. I thought I was putting my prices up because of the emotional toll that it was taking on me. But when I looked at it deeper, I realised I just don't want to do it anymore. And it was because there are so many men at the moment they're not even decent human beings. They're not even decent to their spouses, they're not even decent human beings, let alone being a decent partner. There was nothing to work with. If you have to tell somebody how to not be physically abusive to someone, I don't think couples therapy is the space for them. They need to go and have anger therapy. They need to have anger management. They need to have a different type of therapy. And there are therapists who work with people and I think there has to be a space for people who are living through and living with domestic violence and the perpetrators of domestic violence. That definitely does need support. It's just not for me. That's just something that I cannot work with. And that's probably based on my own life experiences and the things that I've seen in friendships, other relationships around me. And it's also part of my own personal values. Like, I don't associate with people who treat their partners like that. If there was somebody in my personal life who I knew was treating their partner in that way, we can't be friends. I'm being very honest. Maybe too honest, but I think I'm always going to come from a position of women empowerment. Even now, as an individual therapist, there's so many women that I see who are coming to therapy who are basically trying to do the emotional work of their partners in therapy because their partners are emotionally avoidant, or they're very self-centered, or it's hard to have any kind of intimacy with them because they just don't work on their emotional intelligence. They don't have much or any emotional intelligence. And sometimes women can come to therapy because they're trying to understand their partners more. And a lot of the time they're trying to change so many different things about themselves. And sometimes the problem isn't them. That's not to say that there isn't things that they can work on, but I think the thing that they're trying to work on, really the root is that they're trying to change their spouse. But what they actually need to do is change their attachment patterns, because people who have more secure attachment are not afraid to let toxic relationships go. They're not willing to sacrifice themselves for the sake of being in a relationship, especially with someone who doesn't validate how they feel. And that doesn't mean validating every feeling, validate every emotion, but at least being present in the relationship, like showing up in the relationship and not feeling like they are the manager or the relationship's well-being is their sole responsibility. That is part of the problem of what is happening a lot in relationships at the moment. Men are not taking as much emotional accountability as they are. And if you are a man listening to this and you're thinking, well, that's not me, I'm doing the work, thank you. Like, can you tell your friends? Can you tell like your brothers? Can you tell your uncles? Can you tell your dads? Can you just tell the men around you how to step up? And can we start as a society, can men start holding other men accountable? Because I always hear the saying of it's not all men. But if it's not all men, why does it feel like there's a mandemic right now? And the statistics don't lie. There is so much more violence against women and girls done by men. And we have to start holding a light, a magnifying glass, a fucking, I don't know, something has to change, something has to shift. And I think it starts with men holding other men accountable, because I don't think it's the responsibility of women to be able to fix all of these problems, because we didn't start them. This is not all born from mummy issues. Men need to look a little bit closer to home, and you need to talk more deeply, even in spaces with just other men, about feelings and emotions. And you have to talk about more than the latest football scores or who won the F1. You need to have deeper relationships. It needs to go beyond the superficial and bravado. Men need to get better at vulnerability. So that's why my practice is more focused with women at the moment. And even though that is the case, I do also work with men, and I've had many male clients who I've really loved working with and who have made amazing progress. But I think as a therapist, I attract a certain type of man, a man who is a little bit more willing to be emotionally vulnerable. And I love that. And I don't feel sorry for saying some of these things that I'm saying about men, because I'm a mum of boys, and I'm doing my very best to make sure that the sons that I raise are emotionally intelligent and can have these hard conversations. And do not get me wrong, it is hard, and I don't know if I'm winning, but one thing I know for sure is as they grow into men and they grow into having relationships, I'm going to be holding my sons accountable for any kind of toxic behaviours, so that they can show up and actually do the work, and they can actually be responsible, loving, caring, supportive partners. I do hope that one day the scope of relationships and certain dynamics change, because I would love to be able to work with couples again and to go back to when it was really fun and dynamic to work with that client group. And maybe someone who is really like specializing solely in couples therapy, maybe they've got a completely different take and a different type of perspective on it. I can only talk through my perspective and my experience, and I know that I am not the only therapist that feels this way. So if you are a couples therapist and you want to reach out and just connect with me and tell me a little bit about your story and how you work with couples and, you know, what that looks like for you, I would love to hear from you. My DMs are open on Instagram, and I'll link that in the show notes. If you've been feeling really weighed down by your relationship recently and you're feeling responsible, that sense of responsibility that often women do, that maybe you've done something wrong or you've failed in some way, or it's about your childhood trauma coming up. Maybe it is about your childhood trauma coming up, but it's also not solely your responsibility to fix any kind of relationship, whether it's a romantic relationship or whether it's a friendship. Relationships are co-created, so we all have to put that energy and that focus into relationships if we want certain relationship patterns to change, if we want to understand each other better, and if we want better, stronger, healthier connection and communication. And you can actually do a lot of that work in individual therapy. You don't have to limit yourself, because sometimes I know partners are very reluctant to come to couples therapy. There might be one who is more willing than the other. And if that is the case, you can actually go even to see a couples therapist. You could essentially, if you wanted to work on your relationship and you knew the relationship was worth saving, although if your partner's not willing to go to couples therapy, is the relationship worth saving? That's a question for you. Maybe not. But you can do a lot of relational work in individual therapy. And that is a lot of the work that I do with my clients. It's not so much about staying in the relationship. Sometimes the most important relationship is the one that you can have with yourself. So sometimes we work a lot more on understanding your own patterns and understanding how you show up in relationships without feeling the responsibility of having to fix your partner or fix the dynamic or jump through hoops in order for you to feel loved and accepted and cared for. I'll probably have to deep dive into more of this because it's such a big topic. It's very current right now, so I imagine I'll have to touch on it again. But yeah, I had to interrupt regular posting schedule just to get my thoughts out on this. I hope you've enjoyed this ranty episode today, and if you've got something to add or you just want to connect and share, connect with me over on TikTok or on Instagram. I would love to hear from you. Okay, take care. Bye. Thank you for joining this episode of Healing Childhood Trauma. I hope you found today's discussion insightful and empowering. Remember, healing is a journey and you are not alone on this path. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favourite podcast platform. And you can share this episode with a friend. Your feedback helps this podcast to reach more women who are ready to heal and build secure, healthy relationships and heal from the past.